It's time for Recipe of the Day. Do you love pepperoni? Do you want all of your foods to taste like pepperoni? Then you've got to try pepperoni seasoning. Now, this recipe was developed because we did the sausage making series. I did it with my dad on the Cookful because he is a sausage making expert. He was a federal meat inspector in Canada for years and years and years. And then he had his own meat smoking business. And then him and my mom during the pandemic figured out how to make homemade sausage in their little apartment without a lot of special equipment or special ingredients. So he just knows all the stuff. So we did that series together. And as part of that series, I came up with a pepperoni seasoning recipe to be used when making pepperoni. And you can absolutely mix this with ground meat, like you get some ground pork and some ground beef and you mix them together, and then you add this seasoning blend, and you also have to add some sugar and some salt, and it's going to have a pepperoni flavor. And then you can make little patties and cook it, or you can use it in like spaghetti, anything like that. It's going to be delicious. You can do that, but you can also just put this seasoning in other things because there's no actual meat in the seasoning. It's technically vegan. So you can even make like a pizza or something like that and sprinkle this on, and it's going to have that pepperoni flavor without the meat. You can add it to soups. You could add it to stews, add it to chili. It is so good, and it has that pepperoni flavor. So what is it giving that flavor? It is a combination of paprika, black pepper, crushed fennel. That is very common in Italian sausage, but also in pepperoni, a little bit licoricey. Also some ground allspice, mustard powder for a little heat, cinnamon because there's a little warm spiciness in there, and crushed red pepper flakes. That's for the spiciness. Now, you can play with those ingredients. Somebody in the comments didn't like the amount of allspice, so they're saying next time they're going to do less. If you want a smokier flavor, you could add some smoked paprika, do half of the sweet paprika, half of the smoked. So you can play around with it however you want. But really, it's going to be the combination of the fennel and then those warm spices and the heat. That is what's bringing the pepperoni flavor. Now, I'm going to give you the exact amounts in a second, but the reason I haven't yet is because I want to remind you that the seasoning blends on the Cookful are written in a way that is just so super helpful. I really think it is the best seasoning resource out there, and I will link to that for you. There are over 25 of these seasoning blends there, so if you link to that seasoning blend site, you're going to find it very useful because here is what we've done. We've given the recipes for these things like Italian seasoning and Cajun seasoning and salt and vinegar seasoning. I'm reading them now. Burger seasoning, Montreal steak seasoning, everything bagel seasoning, all those sorts of seasoning blends, homemade ranch, poultry seasoning, all those seasonings that you might buy sometimes. We've given recipes for all of them, but we're giving recipes to both make a full 4-ounce jar. That's the standard jar that you would buy if you want to make a full batch, but we also give the amounts for just making 2 tablespoons. So if you come across a recipe that's like, you need Montreal steak seasoning here, you need poultry seasoning here, you don't have to make the whole batch. You can just make 2 tablespoons. And beyond that, we also just tell you the breakdown of approximately how much of each thing. So if you're like stirring your gravy and you want to add some poultry seasoning to it, but you don't have it, it's going to tell you to go ahead and add equal parts of dried thyme and dried sage, and then 1/3 that amount of dried marjoram, dried oregano, and dried rosemary, and then a small amount of ground ginger if you'd like. So it just tells you if you want to just add the things to your cooking as you go, approximately what to add. So you get all 3 of those things. You get the full batch for making a full jar, you get the recipe for just making 2 tablespoons, and you get the vague amounts for just throwing things into your cooking. So whenever you're coming upon a recipe that has one of these things and you don't have it in your pantry, you can come to this seasoning blend resource page and you will get whatever you need. And the pepperoni seasoning is just like that also. So if you want to make a full 4-ounce jar, that's about half a cup, you're going to do 4 tablespoons of sweet paprika, 4.5 teaspoons of black pepper, 3 teaspoons of crushed fennel seed, 2 teaspoons of ground allspice, a half teaspoon of mustard powder, a half teaspoon of cinnamon, and 2 to 3 teaspoons of crushed red pepper flakes, which are optional just if you want it spicy. And I will just tell you that that is enough seasoning to flavor 6 pounds of ground meat if you were making any kind of sausage or loose sausage flavored ground meat like I was talking about before. You also would want to add 1/4 cup of salt to that 6 pounds of ground meat and 3 teaspoons of sugar, either brown or white. And just note, there is no salt or sugar in the actual seasoning blend, so you need to salt and sugar other things that you're adding this to on your own. So like if I'm adding this pepperoni seasoning to pizza, then I would add a little bit of salt as well before going. And I add 2 teaspoons of salt to the 4-ounce container if I'm using it to kind of just like season onto things like the pizza. And I will just say that the recipe does call for crushed fennel, which has that nice licorice flavor, but some people use some other things standardly in pepperoni seasoning instead of that, and that would be either anise seed or ground star anise. You just need to use a little bit less of those because those are ground, whereas the fennel seed was crushed. So I say use about half as much if you're using a ground licorice flavored seasoning instead of the crushed fennel seeds. Okay, if you wanted to just make 2 tablespoons of the pepperoni seasoning, it's 1 tablespoon of paprika. Again, you can use half sweet and half smoked if you want. 1 teaspoon black pepper, 3/4 of a teaspoon of the crushed fennel, a half teaspoon ground allspice, an 1/8 of a teaspoon mustard powder, 1/8 of a teaspoon cinnamon, and 1/2 to 3/4 of a teaspoon of the crushed red pepper flakes if you want it spicy. And then you would add a half teaspoon of salt if you wanted that to have the salt in it. So that is the pepperoni seasoning. It's so delicious. I love having it for all kinds of things. I know you're going to love it too. Don't forget to bookmark my seasoning page on the Cookful. You're going to need it whenever you come across those recipes that call for a seasoning blend that you don't have. It's going to save you. I use it all the time. So I will link to that in the show notes of this podcast episode, both to the pepperoni seasoning and to that seasoning landing page, that seasoning resource. So you have that when you need it. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there, or find it in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/recipeotd. And hey, just a quick note. I'm on a recording hiatus right now, so for the next little while, I'm replaying episodes from the archives, including this one. If you heard me mention a holiday, a season, or something going on in my life that seemed a bit off, that's why. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you're enjoying these older episodes. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, cookfor2.us, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.